Welcome to Insights in Sound, where we talk to the people behind the scenes, behind the technology, and behind the music. People you may not know, but you should.
Our guest today is engineer-producer Ross Hogarth. I could start listing your credits, but I'd be here most of the hour just doing that. Let's just start with the fact that you have so many very wildly diverse credits.
True.
Almost musical schizophrenia.
That's me, without the schizophrenia part.
Right. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, kind of to make a long story short, I grew up in New York. My father is a world famous, he's passed many years now, but world famous artist, Bern Hogarth. And he's known for being the original illustrator of Tarzan, creating the graphic novel. They took the novel Tarzan and turned it into, a comic strip. Mm-hmm. So he did the comic strip Tarzan for 30 years or so, and then started the School of Visual Arts in New York. So I grew up around the artists' insanity in New York. My mother, who's still alive at 93, lives in Beacon, New York, and she moved to Beacon many years back to get closer to Pete Seeger, our closest family friend. So I got my dad listening to jazz and classical. I got my mom listening and being around folk. So I was around, people like Arlo Guthrie, Pete Seeger, Dave Van Ronk, the real folk, like legit folk scene. So I learned how to play mandolin and banjo and acoustic guitar. So all that leads to this, what you call schizophrenic sort of, which for me is just music. Like I have, on any given day, I could wake up listening to, Ornette Coleman or, Eric Dolphy or John Coltrane, or on the other side of that,
or Joan Baez or Pete Seeger.
Right, or Big Bill Broonzy or, so I would get really restless if all I did was one genre of music. And I think that's ultimately the answer to your, if you're going to circle back to your question or your comment or whatever, having been raised, playing mandolin and being around folk music, but at the same time learning how to play French horn and Mozart horn concertos, but at the same time being really into rock and learning how to play electric guitar and play drums, and have my favorite drummers be not only Max Roach and jazz drummers, but be insane drummers like, Keith Moon and Bonzo, It made me realize that my career in music, if I wanted to work with the greatest musicians in the world, was not going to happen as a player. And I came out to the West Coast and I swapped the playing of music to the service side of music and became a guitar tech and a drum tech for pretty much off the bat some of the greatest musicians on the planet. Jim Keltner and Ry Cooder and David Lindley, and worked for a little bit with Little Feed. That's
a good landing, yeah.
I was the guy that worked with what I call the mellow mafia. I found myself into the circle as the guy who would say yes and do anything for, Feet and Jackson Brown and Poco and Ry Cooder and, Lindley that led to El Rayo X and, traveling the world and being a roadie and a tech, a production manager. And this goes back to, I think one of the key ingredients in any successful life or career is that thing that says, like, plays well with others.
Yep.
So you have to get along with people. Mm-hmm. For a good chunk of my life, I would say yes to almost anything. And sometimes that would lead to a resentment about it. But often it was opportunities just all showed up as hard work, things that people didn't really want to do that I said yes to. Mm-hmm. Because of my upbringing playing drums in all stringed instruments, I was a perfect candidate to be a guitar tech for David Lindley and Ry Cooder.
That sounds like a full-time job right there.
It was, yeah. No, I was the guy, like I said, who said yes. So I was really fortunate to have just doors open that are hard work. I just have to say it again and again. And it, to this day, it's like if I see something that shows up like this could be a pain in the ass, this could be a lot of hard work, I pause and I go, there's probably an opportunity behind that door, because someone's probably looking at the pain in the ass and the hard work, and they're going to say no. So the guy that says yes is going to go through that door, that hard work, pain in the ass door, and on the other side is probably going to be an opportunity. That's
And
kind
that's a great attitude right there, because that also endears you to the people for whom you're taking on that responsibility.
yeah. I mean,
Because it's a pain in the ass, because there's a lot of responsibility, obviously, right?
yeah, exactly. I mean, and I'm doing one right now. I'm producing with Edgar Winter a Johnny Winter tribute record, and it's the bucket.
Tall order.
Yeah, it's the Bucket List Guitar Players record, and I get to use all my years of relationships to bring to Edgar Warren Haynes, Derek Trucks, Joe Bonamassa, Kenny Wayne Shepherd, Joe Walsh, Billy Gibbons, my friend David Grissom, Waddy Wachtel, Phil X.
Wow. That's a hell of a guitar record right there, yeah.
Bobby Rush. The Tower Power Horns. These are, through years of relationships, I now get to bring that. And as much as Edgar is a beautiful cat, he's a very complex individual, and this is a really, really important emotional record to him. So now I've got to balance, the making of this record with the emotional content with him. And so again, it's people skills and getting along with people and navigating.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because at some point you obviously made the jump from being everybody's tech to working in the studio. It's a different kind of people skills in the studio, isn't it?
Well, when I initially came off the road, early 80s, I'm looking for opportunities to get off the road because I'm already basically in a relationship with my girlfriend, now wife. And my intention is at that point that I'm looking for an escape plan without really having one. Because, when you're a kid, basically, it's sort of like you see something over the hill that you want to get to, but you're not really sure how you're going to do it. And
I call it aperture blur.
Aperture blur. That's a good one.
You're looking at one thing and that everything else around it is just blurred out, man.
And I was fortunate through a couple of associations to end up in really 3 different situations. One was out in the West Valley here. There was a studio called Rumbo that was just coming into play, owned by the Captain Tennille, who in the late 70s and early 80s were at the very top of their game. And the captain, Daryl Dragon, wanted his own studio, so he built Rumbo. There was a producer named Richie Zito, guitar player for Giorgio Moroder, that introduced me to Giorgio in just the early 80s. So I was engineering for Giorgio. So those were a couple of really strong associations. And because David Lindley was making his records at Record One and Sunset Sound Factory, there was that connection. And so I just became a guy who would find myself to be in the studio on whatever I could find myself to be in the studio on. And whether it was carting Lindley's gear to sessions or whether it was being at Rumbo working, because the thing with Daryl is they were doing a lot of like camping out in Vegas for like 3 weeks or going to Atlantic City or Tahoe. So they needed someone to revamp their monitor system, be their production manager, mix their sound. So I was able to hybridize my gig at Rumbo into being a studio and a live guy, which meant when I was not on the road doing stuff for the Captain or not in other studios, I would be in the studio as the guy who would say yes to any gig that came through. So
you were the guy who filled in all the gaps at Rumbo.
Yeah, and since I'd already paid my dues pretty much, I mean, that's like hard to say what is paying your dues, but I had already felt like I had taken enough shit on the road. And it wasn't an entitlement thing where I don't want to be taken the wrong way.
No, it's because you don't want to do the same thing over and over again. You want to progress.
Yeah. So I was fortunate in my attitude, in my relationship with Daryl, to come up at Rumbo at a really good time where we had like 82, 83, we had Rat and Dio coming in. We had REO Speedwagon. It led me to meet a guy named Don Gaiman. Don Gaiman came out of Miami. He had worked at Criterion, and he had done like stills and a bunch of stuff with Albie Galutin and those guys down. But he had moved out, and he had met John Mellencamp, and he was producing John Mellencamp and engineering his records. And his engineer, a guy he liked to work with that he had met at Caribou Ranch, was a guy named Greg Edward. Greg and I got along. I was, again, when you can get along with people that are hard to get along with, you end up being a guy who that guy wants to work with, because really no one wants to work with that guy.
There are sadly a lot of people like that in our industry,
Yeah.
People who other people don't want to work with. And, it is challenging sometimes,
It's about, that's the people skills thing that
Yep.
I can't tell anyone what skill is the people skill, but it's part of it is learning how to listen and listening to learn, learning how not to talk when it's not the right time to talk, letting someone be who they are, but not be full of shit, so that you don't want to take shit to just take shit, but that person sort of may not be venting personally. If you don't take it all personally, which is like the acronym Q-tip, quit taking it personally.
Yep.
So there was a period of time where Greg was a really great teacher, and he was an angry dude. So I had to listen through the angry dude to learn a lot of great skills. And he brought me out to Indiana, where I was his engineer. Like, Greg was the lead engineer, I was his engineer, and made a really great relationship with Don Gaiman, and we ended up building Belmont Mall, which is the studio that John Mellencamp still has today outside of Bloomington, where every record since Scarecrow has been engineered and made at that studio. So in the 80s, I was bouncing around. I was doing Mellencamp. I was working on some metal. I was working with Giorgio. We did Beverly Hills Cops and Top Gun. And so already now leads to this schizophrenic, as you call it, crazy career. Every style of music already.
And you were doing mostly engineering at that point?
Yeah, all engineering. I mean, you talk about learning, like, where do you go to school? Well, first off, I went to school on the road. I went to college on the road, and my master's degree was
in the studio,
learning from amazing producers.
Sure.
Guys that did it all a little different. Giorgio had his style. His style as a writer, being classically trained musician. Giorgio was all about the melody. He never wrote the lyric. He would get in front of a 57. I would hook him up with a 57 and a reel of tape, and he would just sit there and he would noodle a melody out and sing unintelligible words, but those became Take My Breath Away or Danger Zone, or, so then he had a lyricist to write out sometimes cheesy lyrics that didn't matter because the melody was so strong. So to put together like where I come from into this period of time in the 80s, which is really my formative years in the studio. So you got me, I'm working with Giorgio, who's taking this classical mentality of the melody, which I totally relate because I'm a French horn player.
Right.
But then I'm working with John Mellencamp, who is just banging on GCD with no real melody. It's all lyric. It's all folk singer. But then he's got his two guitar players, and then he's got Kenny Aronoff. So now you've got the heartbeat of the band, the groove. Where's the groove going to sit? And guitar players are now going to have to come up with a guitar hook because not every song. So now you've got, on Scarecrow,
arrangement chops, basically.
So yes. I'm watching this go down. And then at the same time at Rumbo, I'm still continuing my live sort of mentality of like, get it, you don't have another chance, preparation is important. That whole mentality from the road is like, you got to have a spare amp, you got to understand electronics, you got to have fuses, you got to have spare cables, all that is coming into play. And I get to work on hard rock, where at the time I don't really call Rad or Dio that kind of is the predecessor to metal. It's not really.
We called it big hair music back then, but it's true.
Which led to Motley Crue,
to your point,
and
a lot of that stuff you got to catch it when you catch it.
Well, because they're young players and they're not going to. They're not
going to
studio.
do the same thing twice.
Yeah, they're not studio players.
Yep.
But learning a lot of like technical chops from guys like Bo Hill and his engineer Jim Faraci and Dio's guy Angelo and Mike Klink, who was around Rumbo a lot. And
Mike did a lot of work at Rumbo. Yeah.
So So this is all sort of this coming together, trying to figure out how do I put this disparate skill set, and realizing that I'm probably just going to do this basically for the rest of my career, not knowing that, but just I've never really changed that, because every year or every chunk of a piece of a decade leads to some use of that, whether it's Keb Mo or Jewel, or, being asked at some point in the late 90s I went back to doing absolutely insane heavy metal because people had you did Motley Crue. Hey man, you want to check out this young new metal band? And at that point in time, I just made a bunch of beautiful records with Pat Leonard, and I wanted to really mess it up. I wanted to use a bunch of distortion and all the stuff. You can't distort Jules' vocal. You can't, you can't put a Sans amp on, it's just things like that.
Yeah,
so
sure.
They say that, self-knowledge or ignorance is bliss, or self-knowledge avails us not much. Because in the end, if you're in the moment and whatever's going on in that moment is what's happening in that moment, if I'm willing to sort of set aside some prior preconception of what it's supposed to be like, I might hear something today that I don't expect. And that's something that has, if I was going to say I've learned over time, it's like I've really learned the more I know, the less I know. And that sounds like a bunch of hokey shit, but it's
true.
It is true. There was a period in my life where I felt like I was really starting to know some stuff. And I realized the more I knew and tried to bring that to the moment, the less I was in the moment. I was really fortunate to connect with an artist in the mid-90s who still to this day is one of my closest artists, one of my closest friends. I love him with all my heart. He's been there for me in times that I would never have expected. And we've won Grammys together. And my friend Keb Mo, is someone who, whenever we walk in the studio, it's all about feel. It's all about the moment. It's all about how does it make you feel. Sometimes technically, just let it go. Don't worry about it. He trusts me to technically always have his back, but also to let him express himself. And that guy has been a very influential person in my life, because his whole thing is life is just perfect today. You may not be happy about it because it may not be going exactly the way you want, and it's perfect the way it is. So accept that, and then it really is perfect.
Well, and especially in this age of COVID, man, one of the things that echoes with me on a regular basis is that old cliche about we make plans and the universe laughs,
That's right.
And you've got to be willing to be flexible. Yeah. And if you're able to strike that balance all the time so that you can be like you say, the technical backup to Kevin when he's in the studio, but at the same time, you can be open and understanding of the creative process, which is a very delicate thing, it takes nothing to fuck it up.
Yeah. The wrong thing said or the wrong thing done in the wrong moment can break it.
I can imagine, based on the type of projects you've done and the different people you've worked with, that, there's not always this fine line between being the engineer, being the producer. When you're in the room, involved in the creative process, everybody's a little bit the producer. Everybody's a little bit involved in the, in birthing these babies, so to speak.
Yeah, for me, it's a form fits function. I've always considered myself a Swiss Army knife. One of the records I'm the most proud to have brought across the finish line, and don't believe it's the best sonic work I've ever done. It's not about that for me, but, Van Halen's last record called A Different Kind of Truth, which took quite a few years to birth, navigate, get out the gate, make happen, finish, pull across the finish line, and then have, that record be the last record now that Van Halen will ever make as Van Halen with Eddie just passing.
Yeah.
That's a record I'm incredibly proud of because it allowed me to coalesce all my skills into one place where I'm navigating the personalities, a lot of personalities. I'm navigating that element of live where the band loves and has to track live. That's, the only way. Navigating staying out of the way, but saying when the right thing is to say and knowing what to say, when not to say it. And it goes back to the conversation I had in the control room at some point with Alex Van Halen. And Alex is a deep thinker. And, Eddie was always the beautiful, touchy-feely guy. I mean, obviously brilliant on so many different levels, built his own guitars, designed his own amps, sonic merchant, but right down to the core of it, Ed was just all about feel. Like when you listen to his rhythm tracks, aside from being an incredible, game-changing, world-changing shredder,
he had an amazing right hand.
His feel.
Yeah.
He and Alex, that broken washing machine kind of feel that no one could ever garner together, that brotherly thing, and then you add Wolf. But Eddie's feel. So he was a feel guy, and Eddie would, he loved the minute he saw you being European, he gave you a kiss on, there's a hug and a kiss. And Alex is the deep philosophical one. He's the deep thinking philosophical dude. So we're sitting in the control room, and Alex says to me, "Okay, Ross," because he loved to quiz or that moment where, it's the Alex moment. He says, "Okay, Ross," and I got my young assistant who I was dragging around at the time, Matt, who's now a really accomplished producer engineer himself. I pulled him out of Loyola Marymount, and I'm really proud of this kid, which is something I love doing, just to say, right, to interject, because I'm a nonlinear talker and thinker. I love giving it away now. It's I think I got this from my dad. It's
a great thing to do, man.
I love giving it away.
It's one of the reasons I called you, because I wanted to talk about the future generation.
Yeah, it's all about
finish
that.
this thought, and then we'll wrap with that.
Okay, so Alex looks at me. He goes, "Okay, the music business, Ross. Is it about music or business?" And I go, "Alex, knowing you, this trick question is no, neither." And he's like, "Right, on the nose." "Okay, so what is it, Ross?" And I pause and I think, and I can't really come up. Now I'm I'm not really sure, Alex. The only thing that comes up to me is getting along with people. And he's like, "Yes, one word, relationships." And and the relationship. He goes, "I think back to when we were coming up and we sucked, but we could play in a backyard and make people get off. It was that relationship. And then we're playing in clubs and we're making people get off, and it's that relationship." He goes, "It's not the music or the business. You can learn the music, you can learn the business, you can figure those things out, but it's relationships."
If you don't have the relationships, all of that won't matter.
And
that's just it.
To this day, that sticks, because it does. It sews it together for me through my whole career. There were times when it didn't work. It's not like I'm sitting here saying, everything always worked, because there were moments in my career where I didn't get along in that situation, and it wasn't working. And if I really am going to pinpoint why it didn't work, it's because we didn't get along. It wasn't because we weren't probably making, and sometimes that friction creates really great outcomes too. It doesn't mean it's easy. If you don't garner trust, as an engineer, as an assistant, I have to, I need to trust my assistant.
Yes.
I have to trust that he's plugged in the mics, he's got his hands on what's going on, so I don't have to think about it. That's a beautiful thing. That's something I learned as a guitar tech. Yep. That when the musicians stepped on stage, I would build my own cables. I had a voltmeter. I went back to I went to community college. I learned electronics, circuit design. I learned how to fix amps. I learned more music. I learned psychology. All those things were really part of philosophy. I love philosophy.
Yep, same here.
And so as an engineer working for a producer, it's really important that that producer trusts that I have his back, that he doesn't have a frustrated engineer. I'm a frustrated producer as an engineer that's pining for his gig. So I always gave the producers I worked with that trust, and they gave me the ability to move through to come up through my career. Richie Zito, who, he did Cheap Trick and Heart, and and Giorgio, and Don Gaiman, and guys early on like that, who I gave them, I allowed them to just produce or do whatever they did, because so to me that trust that you gain then leads to production. When you're in the studio, if the artist allows you to say whatever, because they know that you're all in already, and so when you're saying, hey man, I'm telling Ziggy Marley, like when I was producing Ziggy Marley's first record, and there were some lyrics, and he was rhyming love and glove and moon and spoon. I mean, these are just, but I would say to him, I love what you're saying, but can we look at these lyrics in the verses, and can we dig in a little harder so that every word you say, and I'd learned that along the way. I'd learned that with different producers where they would sit down, or John Mellencamp or Leonard Cohen, or people that I'd work with that I'd learned by watching them. They would throw away a lyric if it wasn't good. It wasn't about like just the melody, it was just the groove. So people who are considered, like songwriters, I believe, if they don't push themselves a little harder, that are trying to say something, you can, it's like good is the enemy of great, perfect is the enemy of great. So never perfect, nothing's ever perfect, but if good is the enemy of great and it's just good enough, I never like hearing, yeah, that's fine or that's good enough. So if I have the trust to say to somebody, hey man, you're a little out of tune, or can we bump the tempo up, or can we change this word, and they know it's coming from a good place, then if I say what I mean and I don't say it mean, and I mean what I say, then it's listened to. So I have to check myself on how it's coming out of my mouth and whether I have the trust. Because if you don't have the trust, then you can't say anything. Yeah. And then you're defeated. Then that's where I think that's like might as well move on. Yeah. Yeah. So to me, that was like coming into Van Halen's world, to just talk about that for a minute, was like stepping into a pack of wolves. A wolf, it's like the family wolf pack. Can we trust this guy? Honestly, that's why I don't have one photograph of myself with the band. I don't have one photograph of myself, which I regret now. But the reason I don't is I never wanted to be that guy with, hey man, let's look at me. Take this photo. Only if it was organic. It never happened organically, because I have photos of Ed. I have photos of him with the I have but there was never that moment where it was like, Yep. And I never wanted to be that guy, as much as I would have loved to have like that photo, that candid shot but they didn't have someone around with a camera.
There's a lack of, or let's say a dearth of, ensemble playing. And that definitely impacts the creative process, right?
It's been really hard to, for me, I mean, first off, on one level, it's really easy because I got a studio right here, in my house. I've been mixing records out of my house for years. I've mixed every record except for Van Halen and Warren Haynes thing, in my studio, Boogie Motel. But in terms of the recording process, I'm still all about, it's a contact sport for me. Uh-huh. Like, for the most part, the recording of a record is done hands-on in the studio with players. The tracks are cut, ensemble. And so now with COVID, finishing or at least doing like the work I'm doing on work that has not been completed, like the Edgar Winter record, there's work being done externally in other people, other people are trying to, they're doing their overdubs. It just takes longer because no matter what you use, whether you do Source Connect or Audio Movers or whatever, you're still not there. You're still not in it. You don't get to have the moment. There's
exactly. You don't get that energy between the players.
There's no chemistry, as much as even whatever you try to garner. And so I'm trying to accept that and be positive about it and be cool. But then like a couple of weeks ago, Keb Mo flew out. We all got tested. We went to East West. And we did this track, Harvey Mason, Nathan East, Greg Fillinganes, Tom Scott, Dean Parks. ensemble, all happens, goes down. You make your record, you push record, you know. And so that for me, it will never, nothing ever replaces that, you know, for me. The records I make, the music I do.
And that's just it. You know, if you're accustomed to approaching it from that organic perspective of, as you say, that energy, that magic between the players, you know.
Yeah, and
That's
even when
tough
I'm
to
mixing
lose.
a record, I love having my own time and space, doing it. It's kind of like no painter ever wanted to have someone over their shoulder. No one ever wanted to write a song with someone over their shoulder. So as a mixer, I love having my own time. But then I actually like the process of someone listening to the music separately and then together, because I find it comes together so much quicker when someone, like whoever I'm working with, if they're in some relative time zone, comes in and you do a couple little tweaks and it's done.
But it's really, as you say, it's, you know, part of the creative process is bouncing off of other people.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I miss that. I definitely miss that. And I'm always about adapting, and I'll adapt. But I can't say, you know, to go back to my Keb Mo thing, life's perfect today and I'm not happy about it. You know, and then I go, okay, acceptance, it's the answer to my problem. Okay, I guess I'll accept it. Doesn't mean
now that's interesting, because that was going to be one of the questions I asked you, but I think maybe you've answered it. The one thing you wish you had known when you started out. That's probably it, right?
Yeah, I mean, none of us, the one thing that I'm pretty comfortable with in its discomfort is, the only thing I know for sure is that change occurs.
Change is the only constant, right?
Yeah, it's the only thing that's constant is change. Mm-hmm. And if you accept that, then you don't get caught up in that it's supposed to be a certain way. And so I'm accepting this change we're in, and I've been able to accept throughout my whole career. I mean, that's what made me embrace digital. And, you know, I don't look back at being on this huge, large format console with my speakers here, and I'm down the other end of the console, and I don't even know what I'm doing down there, but I know I got a bank of 30 faders, and I have to reach them to do anything, and my speakers are here, so it's all guesswork. Or going to the bottom of some rack in a studio where the vocal compressor is, and I'm on the floor adjusting a compressor, and I can't hear shit.
The LA2A is down here, and
yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It's like, so I think back on those days, and I don't think back on those days fondly, because you go down and you come back up, and you go down, you come back.
And not to mention, I mean, you know, what was our automation? It was an Instamatic camera, right? You know, and you know, that was our recall,
well,
basically,
I gotta say,
you know.
Those were pretty freaking cool, man.
Absolutely.
Like,
and grease pencils on all of the rack gear and stuff, man.
Dude,
absolutely.
At Mellencamp Studio in Indiana, there was just one tape machine, and everything had to fit on that one tape machine.
Yep.
And you had to think through everything you were going to do, because there was no leaving that studio to go make yourself a B-reel. And
right.
So my drums were kick, snare, stereo pair, and stereo room with a bunch of things all combined in there. Everything was like you just had to dance through that.
But isn't that better in a way?
It's commitment.
Because, you know, and that's just it, man. It's like now we almost have the paralysis of, you know, unlimited tracks and unlimited options. And doesn't it take 10 times longer to make the decisions?
Well, it goes to we talked for a moment about philosophy. I have a favorite quote of quotes. It's by, it's initially attributed to Goethe, Goethe. And then there's a guy named Murray, where they feel like maybe Murray added a little bit to it. And it's the quote about commitment. And it says, until one is commitment, there's always the chance to draw back ineffectiveness. Until one is committed, then and when one is committed, then providence moves too, meaning the universe, or God, gets on his side, and all things happen, and material assistance unforeseen that would never have come his way. Whatever you can do or dream, just begin it now. So
nice.
It's the concept of commitment. If you're not committed to something, then you can blame the situation or it didn't. But when you're committed, and you talk about being committed to those 24 tracks, that's what we got. We don't have another tape machine. This is our record, and this is going to be our record. And we're not going to get to the end of those 24 tracks and go, oh, man, it would have been a better record had we had some more tracks. No, you fucking make it work, and you do what you got to do. And if you want stacks of background vocals, then you're going to live bounce. While the guy's singing, you're going into a track, that's 2 tracks. Then the guy sings, it goes into that track, that's 3
And
voices.
you better get it right.
And you better balance it all right. And that's
Yep.
why those committed records, like, talking like about commitment, when I'm committed to something, I'm always better than when I'm not committed. It's something that you seem to spark up on when I mentioned it, so I don't want to go past it without, I don't want you to take off without talking about it, because it's something that I am really committed to. I talk to Blackbird, I talk to Berklee School of Music, I go there when in the past. I believe in the future. The future is always going to be the next generations.
Sure.
I believe that really, ultimately, like a conversation like this, if it's just sort of about ego stroking, then it's meaningless and doesn't have any purpose. If it's like, oh, you're great, you're great, you're great, you're great, yeah, we're great, have a nice day.
That's not the point of this.
No, you try to impart either talk about experience that leads to, just documenting something experiential, but having a point of view about it. And for me, it's about the fact that, and I always say this, and take a sip, to the young people when I'm talking to Blackbird or whoever, I think it's really important that certain things never get lost and other things get moved past. Like, I believe when I came up, and a lot of people our age, there was a certain hazing that was done. You sort of had to be, like, people felt there needed to be condescension or something to teach. I don't believe in that. I think I've learned that that's not a good lesson to learn and not a good lesson to teach. But on the same token, humility and understanding that, your strength comes from sometimes how well you can listen and be humble and learn from someone else. And you can't do that with arrogance and talking and over-talking. And so it's a balance between, as a young person, understanding when you're in a situation where it's a good learning situation for you, but you're treated with respect. Like, never take shit for shit. Don't be around someone that makes you feel less than.
Yep.
Find yourself into situations that allow you to flourish and be willing to do the hard work. And going back to, like, the attitude with latitude. And this thing that we talk about, which is, the opportunities are hidden behind the doors that people don't want to go through because it's hard work. And then having flexibility and learning to be flexible, and then someone like myself, if I find an assistant, like if I find someone in a school that I bring with me as an assistant, the traits that I'm looking for are those traits that I just said. They're easy to get along with, they're hardworking, they're open-minded. Their skill set is less important than who they are, but that they're willing to broaden their skill set by being who they are. And that I don't need them to tell me everything they know. It's more about how willing are you to be teachable. Yep. And so those are the things that I feel like, having learned in my life through experiences, that I can give away, as, a mentor, so to speak. And then that mentorship is of equal footing. I've done a whole lot more, and I've got those Grammys and whatever, blah, 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 blah. But as people, we live on the same plane. And age doesn't equate to a hierarchy. It just means that there's more experience. So respect that.
Yes.
But let's respect each other equally. Don't put me on a pedestal because I've done some shit, because I'm equally human today as you are. And if we can work off of that, then I find, I like connecting with young people. I love the energy. I love the freshness of that, And to me, that's really great. And I don't, I'm a real proponent of the schools that are teaching less all the specific hands-on, where you miss all the existential.
The existential is the most important part. The psychology, the philosophy, all that stuff, that transcends all the technology.
who I'm being and who you're being today, who they're being, I think creates what we do. So I don't feel like what I do creates some success and that creates who I am. I think who I am creates what I do, and then that whatever I do creates whatever the result is, and that's that existential part first. And that's been like that for a long part of my life. Like when that was like the world opened up to me when I realized that. I always thought like to be a producer, I had to like produce a record and then have a successful record, and then I would be a producer. Or to be an engineer, I had to do the engineering part and then have the record I engineered, and that would make me an engineer. I realized that I had to be the engineer or be the producer before I did anything. And then what I did was the thing that was connected to the being, which is like having a mission statement. I don't know any successful company that goes into being a company and has absolutely no mission statement. The success is created by who someone is and then what they do, and then they're already successful. And if you didn't get what you want, you got to go back to the beginning and look at who you were being and go, I got to take some responsibility for this, and that's that commitment thing. Because if someone's committed, if it doesn't totally work out, that's where I'm willing to pull all the faders down to nothing. If I listen back and it's like I'm building on a crooked house here, I better take this down to nothing. Or, there have been times we've had to recut songs because they just weren't right. It's not worth it to put this song is not right. And being around people who are willing to go, no, that's not ready for prime time, was big lessons for me. It was like, that person is so committed that they know that this isn't working and they don't want some half-ass shit out there in the world.
Yeah, and you got to give them that, man.
Yeah.
It's their creation.
And I've been around people who, and it's also being around people who might have a tendency, like the one thing I can also say to artists is like, I've been around people who aren't getting exactly what they want, and they're kind of mean about it. And if you don't take it personally and you look at like what it is that they're not getting, and you give them what they want, and they're happy, then it wasn't about something personal. And then there are those malcontents, those people who are never happy, who are always miserable and treat everybody. And those are the ones I've just taken that like, hey, I'm too busy.
Yep.
I say no because it opens up a yes somewhere. So these are just things that experientially I can say I've learned because, I've made the mistakes in both.
Haven't we all? Yes.
So what was the one question to do your Dan Rather? What was the one question you didn't ask me? I love that about Dan Rather.
That was the question I was going to ask you was, what did you wish you had known before you started?
Okay, if I knew, okay, you can't roll back the clock and change anything.
Of course not.
But there was a point in my life where I did choose ego over pragmatism. It was in a point in the mid-'80s, later, but not late 80s, but mid-'80s when I was with Giorgio Moroder, and I was using my musical skill set at that point to write music again, and was going into some movies and places through his publishing company. And there's nothing glamorous about that. It was all like kind of underscore-y kind of thing, but it worked, and there was some publishing money that still to this day comes in. And there was that point in time where my ego at the time was like, work on this go do Motley Crue, go do another hit record, go do this, and I put aside that like less glamorous ego thing, which was writing music. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of regret in that because I was good at it. And I would definitely, there'd be mailbox money today that so you can't regret the past because it is what it is. But there is that, if I knew that staying on that train was going to mean a lot more money. So I learned that my ego's not my amigo, and so if I'm doing things for my ego, it's probably not the best impetus. And so that was a lesson I learned, and you can't regret the past because I've had a really beautiful. I love my life. Here we are sitting in my backyard.
Yeah. I'm not asking what you regret. I'm just saying, what do you think would have smoothed the way a little bit? But no, you gave me a good answer there.
Yeah, because you can't. You have to let go of those things.
Yep.
But I have to say there were changes that I made in my life by being willing to look at myself honestly, that then I can't regret anything, because it all leads me to where we're at today, which is, it's a pretty damn nice day. We're, hanging out here, shooting the shit with you.
Yep.
And, so that's really kind of it. I think compare and despair. If I live my life comparing myself to others, it's always been, never works out. There's always someone doing better and always someone doing worse.
The only person you're in competition with is yourself yesterday, right?
Yeah, that's great. I like that.
Yep.
I like that.
Ross Hogarth, thank you for being
Daniel,
my guest.
Mr. Keller, it's been a lot of fun.
Likewise, man.
I hope you aren't getting too much sun in here.
Hey, I'm Daniel Keller. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join us each week for Insights in Sound.